very nice. I thought I'd start off and ask the question, and then Tom will respond. Tom, I remember several years ago I was reading an essay by the famous Soviet film director Sergei Eisenstein. He'd just been sort of removed from power by Stalin, and he wrote an essay called On Form, and he described how physiognomy, telling the insides from the outside, telling what's going on in a person from their body, especially from their face, was an antiquated science that modern science had ruled out as completely ridiculous. But as Engels had pointed out, what science declares is not valid, the arts pick up. And then he went on to describe, he knows physiognomy is ridiculous, but when he's in the editing room cutting up for a film, he suddenly becomes a wild physiognomist, and the face is going to do all this work for him, and so on and so forth. And in the essay early on, he talks about, why is it in the cinema that we weep, but we don't throw stones at the villain? That is, the images, they're not just images, there's something that's coming alive, but there's this sort of schizophrenic element, you might say, this dual quality. Our emotions are aroused, we cry, but we never think of picking up a stone or our shoe and throwing it at the screen. So I thought I'd start off with this as a sort of a story that could get you going. I also wanted to add that when I was a kid, the picture theatre around the corner, we went every Saturday to watch a Western or something like that, and a very tall man owned the picture theatre, can you believe it? And he got out there with the lights full on and said, "Children, I'm sick and tired of you people with your BB guns shooting at the screen." He made us all come up. He made us all come up and look at the holes in the screen. We were sort of chastised. But this opens up the really fascinating and complex thing that's throughout your books, and particularly brought together in the last book, What Pictures Want. Why is it that people in general have this complicated on again, off again, I believe it, I don't believe it, that images are not just pictures on a piece of paper, but they have some magical quality to come alive. And as soon as you've said that, you feel, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe I'm being too poetic. I don't really believe it anyway. So it seems to me to run through your books and be sort of a pulse and at the heart of a lot of what really turns you on.
Well, I was one of those kids who I had a bean shooter, and I would fire it at the screen. The little town I grew up in western Nevada, Carson City. My godfather owned the local theater, and I was suspended from going to the movies for an entire month because we were showering the girls in the front row with beans and then firing them at the screen as well. Yeah, I've always felt this kind of double consciousness toward images. That, and they don't even have to be sacred, they don't have to be very important. They're always double, because we look at them and we say, oh, well, that's a pipe, that's a face, that is my mother's face. But then a second later, or maybe even in the same breath, we say, no, it's not, it's just a picture. It's just some marks on a piece of paper. I think that's foundational. And it doesn't have anything to do with Western consciousness or primitive consciousness. I think it has to do with human consciousness. That this is what, for instance, if you ask, how did decoys work for animals? The whole idea of a decoy is that the animal can't tell the difference. The animal thinks what they're seeing is the real thing. The duck sees another duck, and so it lands. But we look at a duck, and then maybe a second later we see a rabbit, and suddenly there's Wittgenstein's duck rabbit in front of us. I have that slide somewhere in this PowerPoint presentation. And of course, sometimes we are just like animals. We see an image, and our hair stands on end because we don't know it's an image yet. or we believe it's real. We're taken in by an illusion. So that but it's more characteristic, I think, of animals to be taken in by images. At least that's the theory. I have a wonderful image in an earlier book called Picture Theory that shows some fish swimming toward a very elaborate lure. And the lure looks like a kind of chandelier. It looks nothing like another fish or bait of any kind. And the hooks are quite visible. And the two fish are looking at it together and they're having a conversation. And one says to the other, "It's funny, they don't go for realism." And the other fish says, "That wouldn't be fair." It's as if the lure is part of the game. And that's what I think images are. They are, among other things, a lure. They have a lure. They draw us in. And we are drawn into them, too. In this particular image, you see, this was based on David Cronenberg's wonderful film, Videodrome, in which the rock star Deborah Harry, playing Nikki Brand, is calling to her lover, "Come to Nikki, come to Nikki." And then James Woods goes and plunges his head into her mouth with very uncertain consequences. So it's all right there. I mean, the images lure us in, they want to devour us. We also take them in, we want to devour them. And I think it's just part of what makes us human, that we have this wonderful, strange, uncanny game with pictures, both moving and still. But I should ask you a question now. I think it's only fair. So, but you mentioned, I think the fetish, that some things we really make something more important out of. I mean, there are a lot of really ordinary images out there, and all I'm talking about is ordinary images, some of which become extraordinary. But what about the ones that are really, really powerful, that we can't let go of? I mean, this is something you study, for instance, with commodity fetishism and traditional fetishism before the age of commodities.
Well, you know, I was thinking almost the reverse, that the images that are ordinary, not special, are the ones that I would think of if I was talking about commodity fetishism. And I'm hard put to think of a particular image. I was thinking, for instance, with your interest in the golden calf, and that becomes for you an extremely important way of talking about totemism, fetishism, and idolatry. And that's an image that for you resonates through the 2,000 years of Western history. If I was to think of fetish power in an image, maybe I'd think of something like the American flag. I've rarely been in a country outside of Venezuela, which is sort of a place which has certain difficulties, where I've seen the flag so prominent as in the US. And I've been very nonplussed by this, and the size of it outside second-hand car lots and McDonald's, big enough to wrap a town in. What gives me this American thing with this flag, and you've talked about Jasper Johns and Leo Steinberg's incredible essay on his work, and particularly the flag. I came across a superficial sort of comment that flags are used in Ghana a great deal to drive away spirits. And I thought, that's probably the best explanation I can think of. But how would it fit with the people who have them in their front yard and the owner of the car lot and so forth? So if we brought this drive away spirits idea to, I don't know what to call it, current mainstream USA, is there any possibility that they could be mutually, it could work, it could fit, someone would not feel it was a complete joke? So that would be maybe my contribution, just for the moment, to a startling image, an image that seems to have colossal power. And the minute you say the flag, am I talking about an image? Am I talking about a sort of three-dimensional object that can flutter in the breeze. It becomes an object as much as an image, but then its image power is inseparable from its objecthood. So as regards the fetish of commodities, I don't think of the flag. It has maybe fetish power. Fetish power means, for me, would mean something like spirit power. And now, what is a spirit? We don't even know what a spirit is in the West, let alone what it is on the west coast of Africa. And the story that Tom tells in his book comes through a guy called Bill Peets. Is that the word fetish comes from the Portuguese, which comes from the Latin, which is the verb to make, fazer. In Portuguese, it meant the thing made. They used the past participle, fetichal, and the story is that the Portuguese sailors in the 14th century, in the 1400s, when they were slaving on the coasts of Portugal, which didn't of Africa, it didn't last very long because they found that they had to actually buy the slaves. They couldn't kidnap them. They asked themselves, what sort of religion do these West Africans have? And they saw they had lots of medicines that they hung around their neck and charms and over their houses, and they attributed human-like powers to trees, to waterfalls, to the thunder and so forth, but they didn't seem to have a god like the Christians had. So they came up with this idea that these people worshipped spirits in various material forms, right? Sometimes very natural, like let's say the thunder, sometimes crafted by a skilled person, a medicine man, medicine woman, or something like that. They said these are things made, which in Portuguese became fetichal, and so the term existed for a few hundred years, and then got picked up in the 19th century with a vengeance by sociologists like Comte, and then power of their own. How does it affect my perception and what I want to write about them? What do pictures want? Yeah.
Funny you should ask. The answer to that question, by the way, is I don't know what pictures want in any kind of categorical, universal sense. It's funny, if I had written a book that said, what do pictures mean? Everybody would have gotten that. They would have said, of course, well, pictures mean lots of different things. But for some reason, the question about desire, I think there must be one answer. I think it may be because this question echoes Freud's great question, what does a woman want? And of course, you know, Freud immediately went on to say, I have no idea. But they obviously want lots of different things, and so you have to ask particular pictures, and you get particular answers. When somebody forces me to get a general answer, I say, I usually go to this one, and I say, pictures want to be kissed. But then you have to ask yourself, what is a kiss? A kiss is a gesture which involves the idea that you want to take something into your body. It's like a gesture of eating. It's not eating. Of course not. It's only halfway. Like a gesture of throwing, but not really throwing. So what pictures want is to incorporate us, and we want to incorporate them. We're going to take them in. They become objects of desire. And I think that's why this fetish concept, which Mick has traced back to the Portuguese sailors in West Africa, dealing with African religion, sacred objects, sacred images in Africa, it is a very productive one. It suggests that the things we make, images, objects, statues, even texts, can become suffused with holiness, with surplus value, more than their materiality. The Australian chiringa, for instance, the little totem object, Durkheim says the totem object, the picture of the animal on the chiringa, makes it a sacred object, and it's more valuable, it's more sacred than the animal itself. If there's a kangaroo image, it's the image of the kangaroo that becomes sacred. So all images have that capacity, I think. to turn into something magical. The American flag is, I mean, it's a reflection of the fact that, say, we don't have a monarch who is sacred, but we do have this thing. And we know that there is a feeling of sacredness around it because people are willing to die for it. They're also willing to kill for it. In my mind, that makes it even more than a fetish. It makes it into an idol. An idol is an image that can demand human sacrifice. It's also a totem, because a totem is an image that brings people together, that they regard as their common clan sign. But it's also, isn't it strange? I mean, does it ever strike you as strange that this country could be involved in a debate over a constitutional amendment to prevent desecration of the flag? You can't trample on it, can't burn it, and so forth. That's never passed. But a lot of people think there should be such an amendment. That you should be prohibited from any act of desecration of the flag. The First Amendment, of course, and free speech work against that. Say, if you're making that as a political statement, then that's protected speech. We're not supposed to have sacred objects. We're a secular Enlightenment democracy. Nevertheless, we do have this object, this strange attractor called the American flag. Sometimes it becomes an image when Jasper Johns paints it and turns it into a painting on a wall. Sometimes it is the most mean and low object you can imagine. The place I think of it is when it gets applied as a patch on the seat of someone's pants. You must have seen this, or just a decoration for a sweater. All of the sacredness suddenly disappears from it, and people accept that. And it's partly, I think, because this isn't seen as an act of desecration. It's just being used as a decoration. But when somebody puts it in their front yard, then it means something quite different. It's an affirmation, a statement of some kind. So the flag, I think, is a great example for thinking about this whole question. What does the flag want from us? You'll remember the great musical Hair in the 60s, the song, "Don't put it down, best one around, crazy for the blue, white, and red." On and on. I'm not going to try to sing. But I've said enough about it. I've got some images in here of the golden calf and other things. We can look at lots more images if you want, but maybe you have more questions you want to throw at me.
All right, a couple of comments that maybe mold themselves into a question or two. On the animal and the decoys, the ducks, I remember in a book that I wrote called Mimesis and Alterity, early on in that book, I got very interested in the Kuna Indians of Panama, the islands, San Blas Islands between Colombia and Panama, make decoys for turtles. They also make turtles for magical power for human beings. And the turtles that they make to catch turtles are totally modernist turtles. I mean, they barely look like turtles. It's really amazing.
Wouldn't be fair.
And a bit of a circle. But the turtles that you put into a basin of water from which you can extract magic for one reason or another, they're much more realistic. So it's a gloss on your cartoon. I was also thinking about your use of the word totem and the chiringas amongst the Arente in Central Australia. And Durkheim saying that the image is more powerful or more something than the actual animal that might be represented. And I was thinking something that you might have been scratching your head about, which is the role of performance and dance and music in the makeup of images. Because when I hear the word chiringa, I think of a very complicated, years-long process of initiation of young men through storytelling and singing and the forbidding to women and uninitiated people of any sight of these these sacred objects. So how much of it is the design, how much of it is the actual picture, and how much of it is the its situatedness in a hierarchy run by old men who treasure these things, rub them against their bodies, so there's a very tactile thing there. So there's the hierarchy, there's the politics, there's the gender division, there's the storytelling that goes along with the men in this secluded group, allowing some young people to come in. There's the circumcision, the pain of that, the importance of that. So the image would seem to me a very, almost minor part of a tradition in which the visual image is, albeit necessary, but a small part. I was wondering, when you were thinking about all the different examples that you've run through in what do pictures want, about the fact that if we look at an art gallery, we see pictures on a wall, but that's so stripped down, that is so so little compared with these examples that I was just citing, and I think there'd be many of them. So images that are, how should I put it, performatively enclosed and bound and energized, versus, in fact, this stark example of a picture in a magazine or a picture on a wall. I was wondering how you might react to this sort of observation.
Yeah, I think you pointed out a very important feature of this whole argument, that the desires of pictures, the power that's associated with them, is a function of their social use, of their encounter with ritual, with performance. So sometimes the American flag is not sacred at all. It's just a piece of cloth. But it can become the object of a ritual. That's why the song I was quoting from Hare goes on to say, folding the flag is putting the nation to bed for the night. And they said, I fell through a hole in the flag. Then it can go from that to being really nothing. It's the same thing with many of the images we carry around with us. I have a little test that I do with my students to show them that they're not quite as modern as they might think in their attitudes. You know, it's just a piece of paper. I asked them, take a photograph out of your wallet. You know, it's usually a relative, mother, brother, sister, lover. I said, okay, now I want you to take a pair of scissors. I'll pass them out to you. Cut out the holes, cut out the eyes. Nobody will do it. Of course not, you wouldn't do it. On the other hand, you would, I'm sure, turn around and say, confidently, it's nothing but a piece of paper. I'm asking you to do a kind of a reverse ritual, a negative ritual of destruction. That's why sacred images are not only revered and worshipped, they're also abominated. They're also feared and destroyed, or the act of destroying them can be seen as taboo. They have to be preserved. Again, that's the whole point of the Flag Amendment, to protect this secular emblem from desecration, that is, from desacralization, from being treated as a sacred object, which can therefore be defiled. Let me just show you a couple of examples. We could spend a long time inside that one. These. Here we go. You all remember this one. It was in the Brooklyn Museum. It was the central controversy of the sensation show. Chris O'Philly's Madonna. Chris O'Philly, a British African artist. And he has taken the Madonna and adorned it with elephant dung on the nipple of the breast. We also had supports at the bottom made of lacquered elephant dung. And he surrounded the Madonna with what in a Renaissance painting would have been putti, little loves, amore, little winged creatures. Instead, what he did was to cut out buttocks. And of course, when you see putti in a Renaissance painting, you don't think they're obscene any more than when you see Venus. You probably don't think of that as pornography. So what was Ophili doing? Well, he was bringing pornography into a sacred image. So does that make these like the putti of a Renaissance painting, or does it desecrate the Madonna? You know the answer. Who was Mayor Giuliani threatened to shut down the Brooklyn Museum because this artist was desecrating the Madonna. And then, within a few days, a pious Catholic from Brooklyn came in and whitewashed the painting. There was a lot of discussion about what was he doing. Was it that he hated the painting, wanted to cover it up? That would be one reading. He wanted to disappear the painting. So it's an act of iconoclasm, where you're going to destroy it. But it turned out that it was washable white paint. It was very easy to take it off. He didn't want to damage the Madonna, the thing that was represented. He wanted to veil the Madonna. He wanted to cover it up from the eyes of those who would see this desecration. So and when Mick says it's the performance around a picture that's important, absolutely. It's not just this picture. It's Mayor Giuliani's response to it. Giuliani said, I hate the idea of a Madonna where elephant shit has been flung at the painting. It showed immediately he never had seen the painting. He was basing this on rumor. And in fact, the New York Times, one of the reporters referred to it as a painting where shit was smeared on it. Nonsense. It wasn't smeared. It was carefully applied and lacquered. So, there was a whole ritual around the painting, but a lot of people had never even seen. Here's another one. You all remember this one. A completely ridiculous and powerless cartoon. Most of the Muslims who protested this, I would say 90%, never saw it. And in fact, didn't want to see it. They only had to hear about it. So that's how powerful an image can be. It's somehow, the power is around it. It's in the human reception to it, the human feeling about it, and the performance, what people do in relation. As you know, this provoked a lot of violence. Not because of its actual visual presence, but on the contrary, because people heard about it. It was as if the image could transmit over the radio. This was the Danish cartoon of a portrait of Muhammad with a bomb in his turban. If anybody's offended by this, I'll get it out of them right away.
I've got two, I'm in a fork at the road here. I want to talk about desecration and desacralization on the one hand, and I wanted to talk about the fear of the image. Maybe, they're connected. I just wanted to say I remember being on the Guam West River, we're in the Explorers Club after all, back in the 80s, and hearing from the shaman's wife, Gretchelina was her name, Moreno, that her daughter Rosario was in a lot of trouble because a man had fallen in love with her and she spurned this man, and then Rosario got sick, and months later they heard that he had a photograph of her and he poked holes in the eyes. Yeah, it's sort of the camera, sort of updated sorcery, given that the new tool. On the desecration and desacralization, I was so energized, so surprised when I was looking carefully at an episode in Australia where the statue of the King and Queen of England close to Parliament House in the capital of Canberra was desecrated. The limbs were taken off, the head was taken off, and so forth and so on. And it became a spectacle that lasted about 2 months. So every day in the papers and on TV, you could see the gradual progression of this desacralization. And the thing that really leapt out at me was how the desacralization brought the work alive. This seems paradoxical. If you cut into the Mona Lisa, if you even smear over this, it suddenly produces this vital response. The work becomes more alive than a human being. And this does involve all sorts of people, political people and so forth and so on, who get outraged, others who rush to the defense. It creates a whole new social world, actually. But it's the life that's in the image, I don't think is directly due to, the life that's created by destruction is not simply a product of the actual human beings who get involved in one way or another, but that itself, that is also incredibly fascinating. So I just wanted to sort of register this, how strange it is that a more or less inert image, right, when screwed around with, becomes more alive than you and me. So this is part of, I might want to continue with that a little bit.
And this is something I actually learned from one of Mick's books. And I think you put it beautifully. You said an image is never so fully alive, never so vital, as in the moment when somebody tries to kill it or destroy it. Think about the photograph in your wallet. It's not alive until somebody says to you, okay, show me that you really believe it's not alive by defacing it, disfiguring it, or burning it. And it's at that moment that the sacred rises up, the moment when it's threatened with desecration or destruction, I think. And I wanted to, if we could, here's two more examples of desecration, which are very ambiguous. This is Serrano's Piss Christ, which of course basically brought the wrath of the Republican Party down on the NEA, and they've vowed ever since that never again will the National Endowment for the Arts support art of this sort. But here I think this is the ur-text on this. This is God's statement about images. It's one I've been thinking about for as long as I can remember. And I've read a lot of rabbinical literature on this, a lot of Christian commentary on it. It is the weirdest law that human beings have ever passed. Why would God pass a law against making images? It is the second commandment, and it's, as you can see from how long it is, this is all one commandment, the two clauses of the commandment. It is, without question, the most kind of original and strange commandment. The other ones are perfectly ordinary. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not steal. I mean, we didn't need God to come down from a mountain to tell us that. This was perfectly, everybody knows that. But this one, we needed God to tell us, don't make any images. Why not? Well, notice, he's not talking just about idols. He's saying any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above or that is in the earth beneath. And it's as if he's trying to say, listen, there's no escape clause. Nothing. I don't want any images of anything. And then, second clause, and, by the way, if you do make them, you better be even more careful. Don't bow down to them nor serve them, because I'm jealous. I'm the only one. It's as if he's got a slippery slope notion in mind, that if you start making images, pretty soon they will become sacred, one way or another, even the most ordinary ones. You can't escape it, so just don't get started. And if you do, look at what the punishment is. It's not like I'll slap your hand or I will be, sort of pissed off. He says, I will visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. This means I'm not only going to kill you, the sentence is death, but your children die for it too, and your children's children, and your children's children's children. This is This is a commandment to punish idolaters, those who worship images, with genocide. I mean, I think it's a completely horrendous and vicious commandment. And no human society, thank heaven, has ever been able to fully be faithful to it. And never, there it is, foundational to Islam, foundational to Judaism and Christianity. Although every one of them has found a way to get around it, mainly by not reading it. And here's what I think the motivation is. God says, I'm the one who creates images, and those images come alive, and those images are you. You are made in my image, but don't you go make images. That's forbidden. All this summed up in Poussin's adaptation of the great story of the most famous scene of idolatry in the Old Testament. Let me stop there. Nick, you want to?
Yeah, I've got something that follows. Yeah, right. The fear of the image, it was unbelievable. And then I got these memos saying, thou shalt not show films. Where was it? There, Dean so-and-so, I almost saw it there. Barnard had a very nice collection, however. And I was thinking, in your department, you had this big innovation with Miriam Hansen, and it's looked like the University of Chicago, which is you think of as this stalwart for the classical tradition, seemed at least one part of it to open its arms up to film. And one of the things I love about you is that not only do you like film, but you use it so much and you use it so well. So I wanted to dive a little bit into this tension between books versus the cinema in tertiary education, and I wanted to do that under the heading of why are images dangerous?
Well, yeah, this is a question that has fascinated me for ages. The relation of words and images, and of course, this is a professional issue in disciplinary formations. The study of literature and the study of the visual arts. Art history and English departments did not communicate, I think, for a long time. There was a kind of barrier between them. I wrote my dissertation on the artist and poet William Blake. It's also the first book I published, Blake's Composite Art, about the relation of his words and his images. So right away, I had to train myself as both an art historian and a literary scholar. And my classes tended to have students from both sides. And it was always this funny moment. The literature students look at a picture and they say, well, you know, there it is. It's a picture of a calf and a bunch of people running around. And the art historians then sigh and say, no, there is symbolic meaning here, the arrangement, the syntax of the painting, the fact that Moses is in the dark up there on the left-hand side, the relation of the figures to one another, what they're doing, all that has to be read and interpreted. It isn't just transparent, like you literature people think. When you look at a picture, you're just looking right through it to the thing itself. So that's one lesson. Then the next minute, one of the art historians will be saying, and besides, there's a text behind this. It's Exodus 32, and it just says, this is an idol is a bad thing, and so what we're seeing here is a terrible crime, and Moses is about to come down and punish these people. End of story. Then the literary people step in and they say, wait, this is a text, you have to interpret it. You can't just read it as if it straightforwardly gave you the program for this picture. And then you get to work. Then you find out that the relation of words and images is where Michel Foucault put it very well. He said, the relation of words and images is an infinite relation. And it's foundational to thought itself, I think. It's something, we think in images, we think in words, and those two forms of thought are continually fertilizing one another, playing off against one another. To me, Poussin's Golden Calf, I'll tell you, my interpretation, overall interpretation of this painting, is one which violates both the literary and the art historical traditions. I think Poussin loves the calf. I think Poussin is against Moses. And I think that's very, very, I mean, if you had asked, if Poussin were here right now, he would say, no, that's totally wrong. Look, I know what the Bible says, and that's what this painting has to mean. But then I would ask Poussin, then why did you make the artist the hero of the painting? Aaron, dressed in white, is gesturing toward this marvelous creation. And why did you show what's supposed to be the terrible, licentious idolaters just having a nice party? In fact, acting out a kind of dance of a bacchanalian. Could it be that when you were behaving as an artist, when you were thinking as an artist, that is thinking with your paint, you were affirming the importance of the visual arts against the text? Look at that. The text up there is about to self-destruct. Moses is about to smash it. This is an extremely complex scene, and I think that's why we still look at it today. I mean, if we were looking at it to say, oh, this illustrates the second commandment, straightforward, bad thing, don't do that, or bad things will follow. Nobody would be interested in this painting. It's because it sends these mixed signals, and I think a very powerful signal of how people cannot avoid making images. The reason they make the calf, according to the story, is because Moses has gone up to the mountain to get the law. So in the meantime, the Israelites ask Aaron, make us a calf to go before us, or make us a god to go before us. We need a leader. Moses is gone. And this is what human beings do. They make a flag, they make a sovereign, some kind of image that can bring them all together, a totemic sign. So to me, the calf is one of Durkheim's totems. It's a collective symbol of the solidarity of Israel, the Israelites who are lost in the desert. But I'm starting to give a lecture. We shouldn't do that. Michael's signaling to me maybe we should let the audience. Yeah, anytime if anybody wants to pose a question or an objection, you should feel free.
Yeah, we've been talking for almost an hour. I've got some more questions, but I can intersperse them with the questions from the floor.
Show what I think of as this is a kind of scientific version of the story of Genesis. Riffing on Michelangelo's The Scene of Creation in Sistine Chapel. And you must know that the cloning debate, the contemporary argument about especially human cloning, and religious objections to cloning. I think this captures what's happened in our time with respect to the making of images. Because we have a new technology now, not just digital image making, but biological image making. That is, for the first time in human history, it's possible, technically possible, to make a living copy of a living thing. So the old question of images coming alive or what do pictures want now takes on a new meaning because of modern biocybernetics. So you get a scene like this little cartoon, I think, captures it all. That the resistance to cloning is a feeling that when people make living images of living things, they are playing God. Only God can make a living image. This is a very old taboo, the idea that the image you make would come alive. But now it's not just an imaginary thing, not a mythical thing, but a technical, biological possibility. Yes, question down.
Okay, I don't know how going to formulate this properly. This is a little off base, but kind of related to what you were just talking about, I guess, in terms of chimeric cloning. I'm interested in what you have to say about zoos and faux natures where we create images of nature for animals. And I'm interested in that space and curious what you think about that in terms of this idea of the image desiring and animal desiring the image, vice versa.
You're thinking of decoys again?
Yeah, decoys, going back to kind of like faux nature, second nature, hallucinating nature, but what that means maybe in terms of animal space. Like, what does an animal think of a fake plant?
Yeah, it's an extremely interesting question. I think images somehow inhabit a border between human beings and animals, and that's one of their differences from language. Some animals can understand some words, but animals can understand and relate to a lot of the images that we relate to. Some animals can, for instance, be afraid of their own shadow, just like us, or they can see their images in a mirror. John Berger writes very well about this in his essay, Why Look at Animals, and talks about zoos, why we want to look at animals, but also the idea that our interaction with animals crosses over the border that divides us from animals in terms of language. And one of the arguments against idolatry, which will come across, why shouldn't we make images of any living thing? That's what the commandment says. Anything that is in heaven above, earth beneath, and he's thinking of the birds, the beasts, the fish. Don't make them. Well, it's because you are likely to begin to worship them, and then you will become like them. One of the arguments about idolatry was that it was the worship of brutes. And remember, totemism, totemisms could be vegetables, it could be like the witchetty grub, or a bush, but they could also be the kangaroo. The idea was if you identify with animals, then you'll be an animal. So you have to rise above the sphere of images. Don't make images of animals because they will lure you into animal behavior yourself. Of course, I don't think Poussin is saying that at all. I think Poussin is saying nobody is acting like a calf here. They're acting like Greeks. That's who they're imitating. And you can see that because the frieze in the background basically have the pedestal that the golden calf is on is based on something like a Roman sarcophagus or a Greek bas-relief. So what they're doing is that they're behaving like pagans. I think Poussin was fundamentally a pagan who had the misfortune to live in a Christian 17th century. There was no danger they turned into animals, but that's what I think is sort of at stake behind your question.
So like when we go to zoos, when we go to zoos, we're looking at living images that include actual beings. So it's kind of...
Well, zoos would be a big, complicated discussion. I would recommend Berger's great essay on this in the essay called Why We Look at Animals. Terry.
When I look at this, I think briefly, of course, of Damien Hirst's Golden Cow, which with deep originality that typifies his creativity. In 2008, he had this huge exhibition in which he sold $280 million worth of works, and for $80 million sold a golden calf on a pedestal, looking very much like the framework that he put his shark within, which looks like a silhouette. So the minimal golden calf, which he sold at that point. So that's a long while after Poussin, but it does allow me to ask both of you to, particularly you, Tom, to pick up something that
raised, but you didn't pick up, which is the difference between images that are artworks and images that are not necessarily artworks. I'll just do a Dorothy Dixer. Is there a categorical distinction that you want to speak to? Or would you prefer to look at it historically and see that in a very peculiar way that the top of the market for art at present is replaying that scene that we've got in front of us, and you could actually identify almost everybody in that picture in terms of the contemporary art market?
Yes, this is the bidding war at the auction house, and Aaron becomes the auctioneer. Yeah, it's a great question, Terry. And unfortunately, I didn't bring a slide of the Damien Hirst golden calf, but I've thought about it a lot because, for one thing, it was a deliberate provocation, as many of Hirst's works are. He wanted to say, look, I'm going to take the great archetype, the prototype of the idol, the forbidden image, the graven image that becomes a god, and I'm going to replicate it. I'm going to literalize it because it was a literal calf, former living calf, dead calf, with gold hooves, gold horns, and so forth. But the other thing about, we talked before about the performance around the work. To me, the great kind of wondrous scandal and the uncanny character of Hirst's calf was the timing. He put it up for auction, I forget what he got, $80 million or X million dollars for this object, much more than the cost of the gold that went into it. So it's not the materiality of the gold, it's that he's made it into this marvelous image. So it goes up for auction on September 15th, 2008, and Hirst makes an enormous profit. Now you remember what September 15th is, 2008. Within hours of the auction, the world markets had collapsed. If he had sold it on December 30th, he would have probably not gotten what its own worth in gold. So the value of an image is historical. And to take Terry's original question, the difference between art and images more generally, I think there is always a categorical distinction, but I don't think, it seems to me the fun of the distinction is constantly messing with it. That's what Duchamp is fundamentally about, saying, look, if I take a urinal, the most disgusting, obscene, kind of unmentionable thing, and turn it upside down, sign it, and give it a title, and put it in an art exhibition, it's fucking well art. So what's happened there? Well, it's the same object, but something's been done to it. I think that goes to the point about performance and ritual, that making an image become an art object, as opposed to, say, a religious object, in this case. But to me, Poussin has said, I mean, his big statement here is, the golden calf was an idol in the Bible. Now, for me, it's a work of art. And it's in my work of art, too.
Yeah, in the spirit of Terry's question, I think it's taken as true that iconoclasm fails and fails spectacularly, and this is a constant quandary. Why is it that when you try to destroy a work that it springs back with double the force? Except for this launched a revolution in religion, gave birth to Judeo-Christian religion and so forth. So it's a puzzle.
But
The iconoclasm that worked.
It kept coming back to life, though. I mean, that's the point. The second commandment, the foundational text for the three great religions of the book, forbid this. And yet all of them, they can't get rid of it. It keeps coming back. And even Islam, which in some ways is the most purist in its art, obviously Catholicism didn't get rid of graven images. I grew up Catholic, and I'm sure many of you here can testify to that. Judaism did not get rid of, they found a way around the commandment. Islam, if you go on pilgrimage to Mecca, on the way into Mecca to make your homage to the Kaaba, to join the procession around this abstract black box where the holy word is Allah is hidden. On the way in, you pass stone idols, old pagan idols, and there are little piles of rocks next to them. And as you come in, you're supposed to throw rocks at the idols to show, we are iconoclasts. We know these. We don't believe in these things. But it's a ritual that gets repeated, and the idols are still there. In fact, it's sort of a necessary part of the pilgrimage that you play out this play. Yes, a question.
And Islam is producing the most exquisite illustrated books and the most exquisitely illustrated mosques. So you're talking about one particular reception, but it's not as if Islam is exclusively any more successful than any of the other religions.
Right, exactly, and especially in images of holy men.
I was in Afghanistan recently with Documenta 13 and listening to the director of the National Gallery talking about the pains they went to paint out anything figurative in their art because the Taliban were about to come. Also visited Banyan and saw the Buddhas blown up.
That's right now. That's his moment in time.
And the Taliban are, the Taliban may be the only religious sect on the planet that is following the second commandment in the letter. But I'm sure that they don't either. They smuggle images in somewhere. No one can really.
They have to use it else to require
Just a comment to something that's been said about many things have been said about Islam. Not all of them are true this evening. And in a way, the problem with flattening a landscape and projecting everything in the image of Judeo-Christian beliefs about images is that you lose actually very interesting differences. You said earlier that Islam subscribes to the second commandment. That's actually not true. There is no second commandment in Islam. It doesn't exist. This is one of the strange art, historiographic aspects of beliefs about Islam and images. There is no second commandment. There's nothing with the prescriptive force of the second commandment in Islam anyway. So that's one peculiarity of this. I mean, where you do, so there's nothing in the Quran, for example, where you get some mutterings about images is in the Hadith, and those mutterings are in fact extremely interesting. And in fact, this is where, if you think about the golden calf from a different perspective, not from a Judeo-Christian perspective, but from an Islamic perspective, you get an interesting complementary picture which actually fits very well with much of what's been said this evening. Because in the Quran, the golden calf moves like a cow. It makes a sound. And so this gives rise to a whole exegetical tradition which is split. So half the exegetes think, well, this is the typical trickery that you get with images, that somebody's put a whistle in it or there's somebody making a sound within it. But the other half believes it was brought to life and was a real calf. And it was brought to life with dust stolen from under the hooves of the angel Gabriel's horse and thrown in with the golden ornaments into the fire at the moment of its making. I mean, it's an idea probably borrowed from rabbinical traditions about the golden calf. But this, in a way, that splitness, that oscillation between trickery and life is at the heart of all of this, but is less explicit in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Thank you. Yes.
I was just thinking back to hair, actually. The Age of Aquarius. Another history that I've heard, another story of the golden calf is that it was the end of the Age of Taurus, and that. I mean, maybe it's way too vast a question, but where does that relationship to imagery start to change? Like, where is the beginning of that shift?
Let me answer this by showing another image. Not that one. Not that one. I'm getting there, don't worry. There's a lot. Well, I mean, part of what you're asking, I think, is, I mean, let's put the question in terms of the long, long history of images that we know about. Say, from the cave paintings of Lascaux to the present. I mean, we really don't have a clue what those paintings were doing in the caves of Lascaux. There's an assumption that there was a ritual, a performance of some kind around them, maybe a hunting ritual or some kind of, since they are pictures of animals, it was a way of using some kind of homeopathic magic to recognize the animals, to know what you're looking for, and to capture them. So let's go forward from that time, hand-painted images on cave walls, to the present time, when we have these new technologies of image making. This is the Turing engine and the DNA molecule, which I take as symbols of the technical revolutions of our time. In between many others, like the invention of oil painting, the invention of photography, cinema, invention of perspective, this long, long history of changing ways of making images. But these are kind of diagrammatic icons of the technologies of our time. On the one hand, the replication of life itself, the DNA code. On the other hand, the computer. And in one case you've got 4 variables, in the other one you have 2, ones and zeros, for the 4 proteins of DNA. This is my answer to your question. It's a still image from Jurassic Park. You could call it the digital dinosaur, or the bio-cybernetic dinosaur. You remember the premise of Jurassic Park is that the new technology of cloning has allowed us to take extinct animals and bring them back to life. And this is the moment, if you think of the caves of Lascaux as a kind of control room, that is a place where you tried to get control over the animal kingdom by representing it in images. This is the scene in Jurassic Park when the dinosaur has invaded the control room. And because remember, all the dinosaurs are cloned female, so that they cannot reproduce themselves. That's a theory, but as you know, then nature has a way, and the females have figured out a way, given cloning, to use parthenogenesis and reproduce themselves without any need for males. That's why the film, like many films of the 90s, is about male hysteria. Women could actually go on without us. They don't need us anymore. We hope they keep us around for fun. So here's this female velociraptor, and she has just turned on the park orientation film accidentally. And the park orientation film is showing the DNA code that has made her possible to clone her. It's being projected on her skin. So I think of her as a kind of bio-cybernetic duck rabbit. That is, you see the code inside of her, the DNA that makes her alive, and you also see the creature herself, who is about to eat the controllers. They're fleeing in terror. She's invaded the control room. And I think it's a parable. To me, this is our answer to the caves of Lascaux. When we bring extinct animals back to life, we take control of the means of reproduction, and maybe a great danger to ourselves. It's also, I think, a great image of the technical revolution that Spielberg was involved in, namely digital animation. Because Jurassic Park was the first great breakthrough in cinema, to animate images, not with animatronics, not with robotics, but with computers.
I want to pick up something on your question, Taurus, and Tom's response. When you refer to cave paintings, early human beings and you use the word homeopathic, and if you have an image, you are more likely to be able to catch the animal. I was thinking of Georges Bataille's work on Lascaux, first off in the big Skira book, in which he challenges all these explanations based on utility, that you make an image, and this is very germane to our conversation because we're talking about the power of images and why we fear them or are attracted and so forth. And Bataille says, no, it's not like Fraser Goldenbrow says that they make an image in order to have this function to catch the animal. Bataille says there's a prohibition against taking life of animals as much as human beings, and the painting is a response to the omission of the sacred, that when killing, not just death, occurs. And I thought that was such a fascinating contrast between these two points of view. I'm not saying which is right or wrong, but it's a very fascinating contrast to me. And I was thinking about our writing. I was thinking, making a big jump here, what sort of images do we make when we write? And what relation, we actually, in I think the way most people think, well, oh, I want to communicate with someone. And, you know, I tend to think there's something else going on as well. You might call it the instrumental function of writing, but there's something else where the words and you and a spectral audience are in another form of communication. I'm not saying it's exactly the same as doing the painting because of killing on a cave, but it's a completely different sense of what even us writers are doing. So I wanted to bring up this contrast.
There are other questions? Yes, in the back.
Thank you. I actually have a question related to the comment that you just made, and it has to do with the complex relationship between words and images. In an earlier discussion today, you actually, Professor Michaud talked about how Giuliani never saw Orfigli's painting, and he was actually sort of enraged or provoked through or by means of what he heard. So what I'm interested in is this notion of hearsay, the role of description in increasing the power of images. And in fact, that actually sort of brings this issue much closer to what we do as art historians, ethnographers, anthropologists, because we actually write to talk about what we see, and in fact our audiences often have no direct access to what we saw. So we are often either sort of increasing our desire or our audience's desire to see this thing, or actually we're increasing our audience's fear of these things and leading them not to see it. So I'm just kind of curious, like how you actually sort of think of your own process of describing something that you see, whether it is a work of art or some kind of ritual that you see in a different culture, and whether you often think about what kind of consequences that it may have in terms of your sort of general approaches to your respective fields. Because are we ultimately trying to sort of incite this desire for what we study? Like, is that the ultimate goal? Because oftentimes, ekphrasis, or just mere description, has that function. It just comes with it. Like, it just incites the desire. So that's just my question.
That's a great question. I've always thought that the relation of art history and literary study, they were sort of involved in a kind of twin or symmetrical mirror relation. That is, when I'm writing about literature, or before I'm writing about it, when I'm reading, if the reading is going well, if there is pleasure and engagement, it's usually because I'm seeing a world. I'm carried along into a space which I can't literally see except in my mind's eye. So there's an activation of imagination. And you mentioned ekphrasis, ekphrastic poetry, like Keats's Ode on the Grecian Urn, which addresses an unseen object, conducts a verbal ritual around it of trying to evoke it, praise it, bring it to life for a reader who can't see it. That's, I think, that's the magical spell that literature is capable of. I mean, not that all readers visualize strongly. I mean, Professor Ezra here in second row writes about what readers see very well, and she's interviewed a lot of people. So some readers don't really read with their eyes that way. They don't see what the narrative is carrying for them. They tend to hear the words more and be acoustically oriented. So a lot of variability. And the art historian's task is just the opposite. You've got to take this mute image, this painting or sculpture. It doesn't speak. It doesn't betray itself. It's your job, one of your jobs, to find out what it is saying.